Hello, and welcome to Psych Health and Safety in Canada. I'm your host, Marianne Baton, and each week we speak to guests from across Canada and beyond about psychological health and safety, what it means, how it impacts people, and things that you can do to make a difference in your own workplace. Today's guest is Beverly Flaxington from the United States, who really has done so much work around the concept of relationships and how we treat each other in the workplace. So welcome, Beverly. And I want to share with our listeners that when I was looking at your work, and there's a lot of it, there's so much that you have done, but it reminded me of when we were sitting around the table to create the national standard of Canada for psychological health and safety in the workplace. And I said at one point, this really isn't rocket science. It comes down to the way we treat each other in the workplace. And your work and the things that you have to share with people are so relevant. So can we start a little bit with, how did you end up doing this kind of work to begin with?
That is such an interesting place to start. So very early on as a young professional, I had nothing to do with this sort of work. I was in the finance business. I was selling high-end investment products to pension plans. But I was every day troubled by the fact that members of my team couldn't get along, or they would think something about someone, but then find it to be untrue. And at one point, my boss at the time made up this little sign for my door, and it said, "The doctor is in," to reflect the fact that I was trying to help people. And along the same time, I had been very interested in hypnosis and the way that the brain works and how some people are able to achieve things, others aren't. And so I just became immersed in the mind and mind body and our relationships and the impact of our relationships on who we are. And from then on, I just always wanted to somehow be able to bring it to a broader stage and have more people understand these things, learn these things, just give them a chance to implement it. And so that was the start, and I just got hooked and started to see the successes and just wanted to keep going.
Yeah, it's so funny because when we see people who are always judging, always critical, always engaging in gossip and negativity, and you think it's the quality of their own life that they're most damaging. And people like you who will try to help us to get beyond that, to learn to think differently and relate differently. You're not just helping us with relationships, you're helping us with the quality of our own lives. So maybe you can start, Beverly, with talking a little bit about what some of the foundational techniques or strategies are that you recommend.
This is a great direction to go. At one point on my journey, I was asked to teach a graduate class called Dealing with Difficult People. And so the class didn't exist. I had to make up the material. And so the students, of course, came in with an expectation that I was going to teach them, how do you get rid of all of these difficult people in your life? And of course, what I ended up teaching them is it's all our filters. And so at the end of the semester, the students came to me and they said, you have to get this information out there on a broader scale. So I wrote a book called Understanding Other People, but the real secret is to understand other people, it's really understanding ourselves. So I talk about 5 core tenets. The first one is recognizing the fact that we have filters on the world. We're all a product of where we come from, our experiences. Somebody told us who's right, who's wrong, what's good, what's bad. And for many people, we don't ever question those filters. We just continue to apply them. So it's recognizing what are my filters and how do they impact my impression of other people, life experiences. Second one is behavioral differences. So we have different ways that we communicate. Some people are very direct, very assertive. Others are more, I want to really think about things. I don't like an assertive approach. And I had never understood how much difference there is and how it impacts how I understand you and how you understand me. So I talk about it as behavioral styles come between us. Then we have values. So we have different things in life that we think are important. This one took me a long time. I do a lot of animal rescue. That's a passion of mine. I've done it since I was young. There's, probably 17 animals here at this point, and really got immersed in that. And just, even the fact that I had to learn other people don't see that as important. They don't. And when I was younger, I chafed at that. Like, how could you not? But then as I started to really immerse myself in this work, we have different things that we think are important, different value sets. And I call it your values speak more loudly than you do, because I, realized that I'm not really listening to the person and trying to understand with empathy. I'm listening to the differences and focusing on that. And so being able to try to share with people, everybody has a different value set. It's not that one is right and wrong, it's that we need to understand it. Don't assume I know what you mean, which is that we get frustrated because somebody doesn't hear us, they don't get it right away, they don't do something we expected them to do. And yet we're assuming that they know what we're thinking and what's in our mind. And then the last one I call I'm okay, but you're most definitely not okay, which is our tendency to point to this other person and say, if you would stop doing what you're doing, I would be in a much better place. And yet that's not life.
And
So
yet
those are the 5 core ones.
that's great. And we'll explore those even more, Beverly, but you're just making me think that when I stopped judging people as right or wrong, the real side effect of that was I stopped my inner critic, always deciding if I was right or wrong. And it made a life so much easier. And you said something off camera before we started, and it was really about that when we can accept ourselves, when we can deal with ourselves, those difficult people are only difficult because we think they are. And yeah,
yes.
Go ahead.
That's the beauty of the work that I try to tell people. When you really embrace this, you actually do eliminate difficult people from your life. I mean, again, it's not that you have to agree with everyone. It's not that you can't have differences of opinion. I'm still going to vehemently dislike somebody who mistreats an animal that I might take into my home. I mean, so it's not like you are accepting of absolutely everything. It's just that you start to understand that the only person who really gets hurt by the emotional energy, that negative energy that we put saying that other person is difficult, is me. The difficult person doesn't care.
Right, because they're just being them, right? They're just, if they are coming from a place of fear, if they're coming from a place where they feel judged, then they may lash out. And the difference between understanding that their lashing out has little or nothing to do with you is so freeing, because then you can see that person in a different way. How do you help the person for whom this is both learned behavior and also that they hold on tightly to it because it's their identity? How do you help them gently start to move forward?
So there's a couple of things. First of all, and you use the word, and I so appreciate it. I do try to get people to see that underneath most all negative behavior is a basis in fear. Um, a lot of people put up protective barriers. A lot of people will criticize someone else because it's something inside of them that they're concerned, right? That they're not going to get, especially let's talk about the workplace. If I don't diminish you, then I might not get pushed ahead and rewarded, right? So a lot of our negative behaviors actually have a basis in fear. So I do tell people, look, you can't call out someone else's fear, but you can, when you're dealing with them, see a little, sign across their forehead that says fear, and understand that you're dealing with somebody who is emotionally vulnerable. Now, again, the behavior, there's a difference, right? In NLP and neuro-linguistic programming, they talk about intention versus action. So sometimes, and they talk about assume positive intent. And that's what I say to people, even though the actions are negative in your view and what you see this person doing, you have to assume it's coming from somewhere where they're either trying to protect themselves, they lack a sense of security. So I do ask people to sometimes try to adopt an air of curiosity or objectivity. So rather than getting triggered, rather than being ready to dislike this person or argue with this person, consider, I wonder what's going on with that person right now. So curiosity is a gift, and being interested and open and learning, that's one big, to me, game changer. The second is that objectivity. So what about, rather than that person is nasty, what about when that person speaks to me, they tend to be overly direct and it's difficult for me. If I can take something rather than being judgmental and make it a little bit objective, like I call that kind of clinical, data oriented. I'm a very emotional, passionate person, but I think that being able to take something to that clinical, data oriented approach is very helpful. And then the third thing is examining your own filters and attitude and behavior towards someone. There's a saying about you get what you give. And it's not to say that there aren't, negative people out there, difficult, quote unquote, people out there, but you do encounter them less when you go out somewhat looking, for the most part, for people to be good at heart.
Yeah, it's so true. I often hear people say everybody's out to get you and they're, nobody cares. And I think that's not my experience at all. But I had to come to that because I remember a time when I thought people who were passive aggressive were just out to get you and trying to manipulate. And then when I realized that when I'm really overwhelmed, when I'm really in fear mode, I shut down and I don't respond, which is passive aggressive. And I remember reading, Beverly, that we most resist the behaviors that we're afraid of in ourselves. And I thought, well, I don't do that. I'm not passive aggressive, because I'm not very often. But that is what I do when I'm really in fear-based mode. So it's been a fascinating journey. Now I can look at somebody that's passive aggressive and go, oh, I wonder why they don't feel safe to tell me how they really feel, and take it from there. Now, you talk about values, and I've seen some of your videos and some of the work that you've done on values. Can you expand a little bit more on that? Because I think it is difficult, saying you don't like people who hurt animals. Well, most people don't, but sometimes it's not quite as stark as that, where we can judge others as less than or wrong because their values don't match ours.
Exactly. And this is why I think this part is so deeply rooted and so difficult for many of us, because so values really are the filter that tells us what's right or wrong, what's good or bad. And we hold different ones. And so the way that it often plays out is with my spouse, with my children, with my coworkers, whatever it may be. If I have a different set of values, I mean, we're certainly seeing it play out in our country on the political scene to a very extreme degree, right? So what happens is if I can't have a knowledge, if you will, about what mine are and how they drive me and how I will quickly label someone, oh, you're a good person, oh, you're a bad person, right? If I don't see that, then I will have an immediate wall put up or defensiveness or dislike of you. And what I try to get people to say, and this has certainly been my journey in I used animal rescue as an example, but I think about the people that I've worked with in that field, they would likely never be people who in my rest of my life, I'd be friends with, so to speak. But you bond through this value. And so there's aspects where we gain a lot from it. Where we have to be careful is where we get exclusionary. And we say, okay, it's only people with those values that I like. I don't like people over here. And yet our values are a function of where we've come from, the experiences that we've had. So it's very important that we recognize the right and the wrong. As another example, there's a value, we call it resourceful. It's an ROI value, return on investment, and it's financially oriented, it's time oriented, it's resource oriented. I happen to also have that one in a pretty high position. And I just remember with my oldest daughter, who's taught me more than everyone I've known in life put together, she would, even as a child, comment, why is it that everything has to have some sort of an outcome? Why is it that, we can't just let it go and see where it goes? And I can remember at the time thinking, oh my gosh, I'm not teaching this child right? But then when I started to learn this work, I thought, she's giving me this message that I'm so emotionally invested in that value being a right value. So we can't get rid of them. Okay. I mean, we have them, but we have to recognize them. And now when I do encounter something that I quote unquote don't like, it's a message to me to say, let me look at this. What is it in me that's reacting to what's going on here? But awareness is the number one thing. So I never want people to think our values, they're not wrong. They're part of who we are. What makes them wrong is that when we assume that everyone else should operate by the same set, and if you don't, there's something wrong with you.
Yeah, I use the analogy that if what I care about is the amount of work I produce, and what you care about is the quality of work you produce, we could butt heads because I think you're dragging me down and you think I'm sloppy, or I could get my ideas going and get you to double check them to make sure that the quality's there, and we could work together appreciating each other's values rather than fighting against them.
What a beautiful example. And that ultimately, I think if we can teach people, there's so much more in the complement rather than in the sameness. But I think if we're unaware, we strive for that sameness, and then we miss so many opportunities to open our eyes, to see other aspects of life, and quite frankly, to be better people because we've learned from someone else.
Yeah. I think too, Beverly, that some people feel threatened that if you don't share my values, you're judging me. And I need to prove to you that my values are right. And that can cause a lot of problems.
And I think that's where too, it is important, I think, and again, my filter, that we at least respect and recognize that we have these differences. And if we could just talk about the fact that we have these differences rather than try to convince one another, I mean, imagine, because I think we all have had life experiences where on the face of it, you meet someone, you work with someone, a friend introduces you, and for whatever reason, your impression or your expectation is, I'm not going to like that person. And then somehow on your journey, you have an opportunity to interact with this person in a different way. And you think, boy, I have a great connection with this person. I really enjoy this person. We've all had that. So think about that. I mean, what has happened? You're the same person. That person's the same. It's a difference in your viewpoint and your expectation. So we
It's
can
what
do
your
that
daughter
with them.
said, right?
Exactly.
It's what your daughter said. It's that if we have set expectations for people, you need to be like this, and they let us down, then we're upset. Whereas if we just let it be, to quote Paul McCartney, that we can be pleasantly surprised much more than we're disappointed with people. So
And
in
the
all
richness, the richness of our relationships increases.
Yeah, for sure. And the stress in our relationships decrease. So with all the work that you've done, Beverly, what would you say are the aha moments, the turning points for your students or for the people who take your workshops or attend your events? What are the things they come up to you and say, that changed my life, that really hit me?
Let me think of, I mean, there are so many. So let me think of what I would maybe summarize as the top three. One big one is the differences in the way that we communicate. So I think that people in some ways, viscerally, maybe they experience, boy, I don't click with this person. Or I feel that I'm trying to do the right thing, but I'm not getting something back in return. And when I share the fact that we have different preferences, the tone of voice we use, the pace, the way we process something, and that in a way is speaking just as loudly as whatever words we're using, people are really stopped in their tracks. I think they're really stunned by how powerful those differences can really come across. So that's probably number one, I would say, over the years. Number two is this idea that we make assumptions based on the way someone looks, what we hear about as their background. I got assigned to this project, and how can someone from X department possibly be a good partner for me? We're so unaware that we're talking to ourselves and putting together this story, this picture, without having actual experience to back it up. And I have had people come up, and they're almost embarrassed. And I say, none of this is about self-flagellation. I mean, I've learned my best lessons in this work from getting hit in the face, mostly by my older daughter, about something, and really having to take that step back and think, I have to rethink this. So that's number two. The third one is the power of our self-talk. So think about it. Simple example. I'm standing in line at the checkout, right? It's holiday time around here. It's crazy everywhere you go. And cashier has maybe a mad look on her face. Again, I call it a mad look. I'm standing in the line. I start talking to myself about how you can't find good help anymore. Everybody in these, right? Everyone in these retail stores, they're so nasty. And they're not even very good at what they do. They're fast. So there they are, mad. So by the time I get up to that person, I'm not very open and accepting, and my self-talk has actually put me in a box. And people will come up to me after sessions and they say, I didn't even ever realize I talked to myself.
Yeah. Yeah. Those are all amazing. I think about Brene Brown's work with the stories we tell ourselves. And now my sister and I will do that to each other. We'll say, and what's the story you're telling yourself about this? Because we tell big, big stories with lots of details that have no basis in fact at all.
Oh, I have the gift, I call it a gift, of coaching a lot of people in the work I do. And this is probably the number one thing I talk to about, because they'll come to a session and they're telling me all these things that unfold. So what data do you have? What information? Well, no, I just know. That's what people say, right? I just know. And it's like, so you're a master storyteller then. How come you don't know that it's going to go in a different direction? And so I think that those are the things that are, they stop people in their tracks, mostly because we're so
Yeah, I think back to really that idea of the stories that we tell ourselves and the way that I used to ruminate. So you and I, Beverly, would have a conversation and then I'd go away and I'd start thinking, oh my goodness, I've hurt her feelings, or I said something and she took it the wrong way and she's upset with me. And I would tell this big story to myself and be physically unwell. Now I would just call you and say, I was thinking about this and I'm hoping that, and usually the other person says to me, oh, no, I didn't think that at all. It's fine. And I can move on. But when I think about the pain I put myself through before that, it was quite ridiculous.
well, and you're keying on something I think is so important when we think about safety in the workplace, which is our tendency to paint a picture for someone else's behavior with what we would be doing in that same situation. You think about managers to employees, I'm coaching you, I'm giving you feedback because I think you need to shift behavior. But if I'm not a self-aware manager, I'm asking you to do what I would do, not necessarily what's right for you. And you had that awakening. And I think until we see this, we do this all the time, which is, and that's a bit of don't assume I know what you mean, which is painting someone else's behavior with our brush,
right,
without seeking to understand.
Yeah, again, one of those aha moments where you really start to think differently about other people. Well, you used the most positive interpretation. And my colleague Loretta Brill, she says an MRI, the most respectful interpretation. But the way I look at it is, what would it take for me to lash out? What would it take for me to get frustrated, to be dismissive, to have that angry look on my face when I'm working on a cash register? And we're always going to believe that if it was us, there's some external source of stress that's causing us to behave in less than ideal ways. It's the attribution error, right? Whereas we see other people as behaving badly because they're bad people, we would always attribute our bad behavior to stressors that are external to us.
I tell a story, and when I wrote about understanding other people, and it was a true experience where I was driving back into my own neighborhood one afternoon, and this car is coming up one of the streets, and this is a very quiet neighborhood, quite fast, and actually starts to even go through the stop sign. And my immediate reaction was essentially, what is wrong with that person? And I'd like to go tell them off. Well, then I see through the windshield, it's one of my neighbors that I love. And in fact, at that point, my kids were young. She would help me all the time. And of course, my reflection was, oh my gosh, she must be having a bad day. She's probably right. And the whole thing probably took all of 50 seconds. It was probably less than a minute. But I drove into my own driveway and I just sat there for the longest time processing that experience, because I was ready for a fight. But then I was so willing to give her a break. And so you have talked about it, I think, so perfectly. So we let ourselves off the hook. So if I was the one, I would have, and it was my neighbor, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. One of the kids is sick. I'm on my way, right? I'm on
Yeah.
my way to school. I've got a reason. You're just disobeying the traffic laws.
Yeah, it's beautiful, beautiful stuff. And there's such simple concepts, Beverly, but they're so difficult for people to integrate into their lives. What do you think it takes for someone to be ready to hear what you're saying and actually make change?
I think you have to. So I have started in the last few years writing a lot about emotional intelligence and that self-awareness in particular, because I used to try to share with people this idea that if you're going to make significant behavior change, and that goes back to my hypnosis roots, you really do have to see that the behavior you're engaging in is not to your advantage. So if I want to take a simple example, better at time management, I have to have some experiences where I didn't complete something or someone was upset with me because I did not manage my time well, right? So I'm not going to take steps to do something unless I self-recognize what I'm doing is not helping me. And so I think we have to kind of apply that same thought process to relationships. If you are still what I would call kind of stuck in it's everyone else out there, you're simply not going to be open to this. And I try to say to people, I think it's not that everybody's behavior is beautiful. And even when I say assume positive intent, it has more to do with the fact that in that moment, that person might not have a better coping mechanism. So it's coming from the best place they know how. People, we see the cycles. Somebody who abuses has typically been abused. So the idea of assuming positive intent is not kumbaya, everybody's beautiful. It's understanding that there's something that that person is trying to express and they're at the best place they can be. So I think that, if you get tired of having difficult people everywhere, if you get tired of broken relationships, if I think it's exhausting. And so you eventually get to a place where I don't want to be in this place anymore. What shifts could I make that might enhance my relationships? And I'm willing to take some ownership. But I think I call it the burr in the saddle. You have to be a little uncomfortable to be willing to do it, because it's just easier to sit and say, it's everybody else out. Oh, Bev. And I've had people tell me this. You don't know my colleagues. You don't know my family. You don't know. And I know them.
Yeah. My mother used to say to me in a voice dripping with sarcasm, no, it's not you, dear, it's the rest of the world. And I think that's what she was getting at, is that often if we're at that place, we need to examine ourselves. I was doing a session once, Beverly, and we were talking about, good mental health and positive mental health. And a woman in the session said to me, life just sucks and people just need to get over it and know that that's the way it is. And I said, so funny you say that, because I always wanted to do a big poster says life sucks. And underneath, if you think this all the time, you probably need some help, because it does sometimes, but it doesn't most of the time. And I think we kind of take our negative experiences, our negative thoughts about people and about things, and we just drag them forward and put them on everyone and everything that we encounter. But the way that you describe it, with those different components that we can start to pull it apart and see how we do it, I think it's beautiful to help people. Yeah.
Yes, so I'll also use the term detective work. So I tell people all the time, I just feel like what I'm doing and what I'm asking people to do is a little bit of detective. If you have that openness to try to understand and not put up the wall, you're going to learn something. And I think some of the most difficult, to use that word, relationships that we have in life are the best teachers that we
We,
have.
we don't think that at the time, but yes.
We don't think it at the time, and it's the same thing with experiences. But you think about it, and if everyone just got along with you, I mean, you'd never really grow, change, learn. So, and again, I don't have rose-colored glasses, and we have, as I said earlier, a lot of difficult things going on in our country, with politically, with COVID. So it's not that you look out at the world and everybody's wonderful and everything is beautiful. It's more that when you hit those situations that trigger you, I think you learn them, you use them as learning experience to say, what is it about me right now? And how could I grow and change? So it's not that we link arms and everybody's going to be our friend and that's not reality. And that's not what I try to get people. I just think that if you could see that there is more to it, it's like peeling back that onion. You learn and you grow.
Yeah, it's like me now being with passive aggressive people. Instead of me getting triggered, I get curious about where they're coming from. And I think that's what you're saying. Now, you also mentioned that you're doing work on emotional intelligence. And what else are you looking at right now? What do you see as coming on the horizon?
I certainly think, conflict resolution. I've been doing a lot around feedback. You used a beautiful example earlier where, you had gone to someone and kind of said, hey, I want to check in with you about this. I think that we have generally in our culture, human beings, the culture of human beings, we have a resistance to the idea that if I say anything to you that could be construed as negative, we are now in conflict. And so we don't share things. And so then things build up. And then there's either an explosion, or I no longer want to be your friend, or I take you off my social media. And so I've really been trying to work on the idea of teaching people that, if you ask someone if they want feedback, they might say yes, but in their mind and their emotional resistances, no way, because I don't want you to tell me something about me you don't like. And so I think teaching people this idea of kind of being able to express a concern, an observation, a reaction to something without the threat that it's going to destroy the relationship is really, really important work. And I see it in the workplace. I see it in personal relationships. We get called in to coach, and it's just stunning to me because the manager will tell me all these things, and I will work with the employee, and the employee will say they've never heard a word of it because of that. So I've been doing a lot of that, trying to help people to see that you can share something without being offensive, without being passive aggressive, but we're not really taught well how to do this. I teach a graduate class on managerial skills, and they have to give presentations. And a couple of semesters ago, so I'll sit there and I'll give the feedback. I'm the professor, but I insisted that as part of the overall grade for each individual, they had to give one piece of positive feedback. I really enjoyed this. One area for, I think you could improve this. And it was stunning to me because at the end of the semester, students came and they said that small piece was one of the most powerful because they had never in their lives had confidence to tell someone, I think that could have been better if you might have done it that way. The positive feedback, everybody's cool with that. But being able to just say those slides were so, I really enjoyed everything you said, but those slides were so cluttered with words, I was having a hard time keeping up. So we're not taught it, unfortunately, and I really think it's a skill that could shift relationships tremendously.
Right. As opposed to you messed up those slides or you made a mess of those slides. Those slides were overwhelming. It's just the choice of words that you use. But there's also a skill set to be able to hear criticism and say either, well, thank you for that, and know that you don't agree with it, or thank you for that, and I'm going to learn and grow from it, rather than how do I defend myself against that criticism? Is that something that you teach as well, Beverly?
It absolutely is. And in fact, I was running a session yesterday and one of the individuals was struggling with something. And so I was saying to him, I'm just asking you maybe look at it a little bit differently. And one of the others said, well, in defense of this person, right?
Yeah.
It's been very busy. And so I said, okay, this is an interesting teaching moment. I said, so is your perception that you have to defend him from me, from what I'm sharing? And so we had an interesting discussion about it because I think that there is for many people a knee-jerk reaction that if anything is said that's an opportunity for improvement or change, or right now the way that you're talking to me is difficult for me, we want to put up the wall. But again, we don't then learn, we don't change. My daughter was truly like one of the most difficult people to raise. She is a phenomenal adult right now. And if she'd let me be with her 24/7, I would. She's amazing. But as a child, and so, she'd say these things that were harsh because she was 8 years old or 12 years. She had no filter. And thankfully, I had started to do some of this work. And, my immediate reaction was always like, I'm the parent, you're the kid. Like, where do you get off? But I would go into my own room and I would think, I need to process from her lens because she is seeing something that she may not be very good at expressing it, but that I need to learn. And so I think, it's our normal tendency to just fight back, or again, like this, like I'm going to defend my colleague from you. When I think, man, if we could just have that, and we don't have to accept everything. I have a saying, CTS, consider the source. I mean, some people, they have their view and it's okay. I mean, I hear what you're saying. I'm going to think about it, but maybe I disagree. That's okay. You don't have to take in everything everybody says to you, but consider it.
Yeah, that's right. Somebody said for a woman my age, my hair's too long. And I very much think that is their opinion and that's okay, but I'm comfortable with it. And so I don't need to be upset about it because that's truly how they think. But if I told you that you had to change your hair color to blonde today, I would hope you would just say, well, consider the source. It's not something that I want to do.
And in fact, personal stories while we're sharing, since we're in the same age category, I went gray at about 29 years old. So I started coloring it. And for many, many years, I would ask my hairdresser once I got into, my 40s, like, I'm just going to go gray at this point. She would say, oh, no, it's going to age you overnight. People are going to think that you're washed out. And so I took it. And so during COVID, I said, you know what, at one point you couldn't even go get your hair done. I said, I'm gonna let it grow out. I've never got as many compliments. And now I think, you know what, I should have just trusted my own gut all those years ago, because I was convinced by someone else who, again, had a filter from her
Right.
role. And so it's so interesting, because that's the sort of thing where, it maybe somebody's feedback is exactly the right thing. And maybe it's like, hey, you know what? I need to trust my own instinct about this. But that's where, and that's categories too. What does that mean? What do women of your age group do? What is the characterization of them? I get so, you have me on a topic I get so impassioned about: generational differences. So I'll have people in my age group tell me of course, the kids today, they don't care as much. They don't work as hard. Now I teach graduate school. I teach undergraduates. I have kids in these age, and I see these people with unbelievable passion. They work very hard. They're extremely dedicated. In fact, I just telling my own son, you need to pull back a little bit. Like, you're young, like, stop. And I get so bothered. I guess my filter kicks in as to, why do we have to force people into some sort of a box and
Right.
say, that's everybody in that box? And we limit ourselves in learning, growing, meeting people. Some of my closest friends are in that age category, 40 years younger than me. And I
Yeah.
love spending time with them.
Yeah, exactly. I feel exactly the way you do about generational differences. I think it's interesting to understand the different exposures that certain generations have had, but to paint an entire generation with the same brush just seems ridiculous. And I've resisted doing work on a generational level. Although I will say that when I look at my own children who are millennials, and thinking about the workplace, is that they just wouldn't put up with what we did. They're not going to be blindly obedient. They're going to question, and they're going to work hard, but they're going to want to understand why, not just because I told you to, because they weren't raised with because I told you to.
Exactly. And that's, I think, some of what I'll hear from my clients, they're resisting, is this idea of, maybe if it's an older person, like, why do I have to answer why? We're paying them a paycheck. And that's where I think we get these generational differences. And there is reality, right, to different experiences, growing up in different influences. But it's more the idea, back to that self-awareness. I'll
Yeah.
say, well, is it potential, though, that your filters are that it should be done a certain way, rather than maybe seeing them as your teacher, that you could learn something?
Right. With my work, I'll often go to somebody who has no connection to the work that I do, and ask them what they think, because they have a clearer vision for what they would expect it to be. And then they can say, well, it's missing this, or I don't understand why you said that. And it's a great perspective for me to make sure that the
Yes.
work is speaking to everybody.
Yes. Well, I have to say, though, it's so needed. And I tell my students all the time, we teach certain skills about managers, and they'll say, how come what you teach us in class is not what we experience from the managers we have? But I tell them, but this is why you're learning it, because you're going to have an opportunity to shift some of this. And so I think it's just a very important topic, and that we continue to highlight it, because most people I know, if I would never want my children, especially my two daughters, to travel the professional journey that I had to travel to get to some sort of a place where I could say I'm happy, and I'm really enjoying what I'm doing, because there's a lot of, if we talk about it as safety, there is a lot of danger depending on the sort of person that you work for and with, and learning how to bring different aspects to the workplace, I think it's critically important.
Yeah. I think the Me Too movement really opened my eyes to the universality of what women have put up with in the workplace for many years, thinking that, most of us kind of thought we had to dodge that, and that's just the way it was. And when you think that so many experienced similar types of harassment and condescending treatment, it was amazing. And I have to say, I do really credit your past president for helping change how women look at that, because it certainly brought it forward. So I appreciate it.
And but that is a good example, right? Of certain things that you think kind of on the face of it, that's, boy, that's negative, something that's happening, can actually be something that triggers something that's actually a very, very positive outcome. That's a perfect example.
Well, just on that vein too, Beverly, what do you think are some of the positives that have come out of the pandemic?
Well, there are actually many, I think. First of all, I do think it has encouraged people to take stock of what work means in their life. And I've always been a little hesitant with the word balance. It always reminds me of being on that beam and trying to make sure you don't fall off. But I do think that it's given people a bit more of a freedom to talk about family, to talk about, other interests, to relook at, do I really want to spend 2 hours each way in my car commuting? Is that what I want my life to be? So I think that it has been a tremendous awakening for people about what does work mean in my life? And am I doing the right sort of work? So that's encouraging to me, because personally, I think that's, and you may decide, I do love sitting in traffic for 2 hours. I love listening to audiobooks. I mean, again, right, there's no right or wrongs, but it's just questioning it for yourself. Mm-hmm. That's a big one. I think another one is the fact that it really did, in a lot of cases, have people, for their family relationships, be it your roommate, your spouse, extended family, try to figure out how to be together in a different way. I mean, and in a lot of cases, it caused disruption and a lot of things to come to the surface. But again, I don't know that that's, it's simmering there. So, and in some cases brought families closer together. I think that it absolutely opened our eyes to the value of simple things like a hug.
That's what I miss the most through the whole pandemic, is the hug. Yeah. The
hug. I had lunch today with a very dear friend of mine who's in rehab, and she won't come out. And so I always would go in December. It's her birthday. And for 2 years, not even been able to see her. And so just that connection with people, I think we missed a lot. And then I think that we also learned, though, you and I are in, we're separated by many, many, many miles, but I feel a connection with you, and I'm able to see you. We're able to have this conversation. So I think the gift of different ways to connect with people also came out of this, where I don't have to get on a plane and fly to where you are and sit down on the couch with you, as much as it would be nice to do that, but we can connect still. And so I think that has really been another gift coming out of it. And the last thing that I will just say is I really hope that maybe it has encouraged us to just think about what matters in life, what we value, and to have some hesitancy to just get back on a treadmill running nowhere.
Uh, yeah, you and me both. That's what I'm hoping, that we don't just get back to it. Just one last thing, Beverly. I love the way you choose to use the word shift instead of change. And can you just share with the listeners why that is?
So people resist change. I don't want you to change me. I don't want you to change my conditions. And that isn't that we're not open to ideas and whatnot, but there is a stigma with the word change that means I'm going to have to buck up and probably push through, and this isn't going to be fun for me. I think that shift connotes more of, we're changing positions, we're moving to a different place, we're experimenting with different things. There's a fluidity to it that isn't as stark as change. And so I have come to really appreciate that word so much more, because I think we can shift, we can make small shifts. Like that's what I say to people about this work. Again, you don't have to wake up tomorrow morning and love everyone, and you don't get upset, and the cashier, you remember that maybe she's having, but you could just do one thing. You could just do one thing tomorrow. And so the idea of shift to me is I can incorporate something, I can experiment with it, I can see if it fits me. And then if that works, maybe I can shift a little bit over here and try this, and shift a little bit over here and try this. So I think it just connotes more of this journey rather than, oh my gosh, I better change or terrible things are going to happen.
I love it. And I'm going to shift my language from change to shift, because I really was inspired listening to you talk about that. And I always like to ask Beverly, this podcast is called Psych Health and Safety in Canada. And we do have a formal definition for what psychological health and safety in workplaces is. But if you were talking to someone who had no idea of the concept, how would you explain it in layman's terms?
So I think it is to be able to be oneself in the workplace without the threat that exposing who I am and being myself is going to harm me in some way, be it a negative review, be it not allowing me to take advantage of certain opportunities. So I think that's a big part of it. So being free to be who I am without the threat that that is somehow going to harm me. I also think there's an aspect of allowing me to determine my, I don't want to use the word commitment, because it's not like people who don't want to work 15 hours aren't committed, but, allowing me to craft what matters to me in my life. So when I think of being unsafe, it's like having a manager who thinks that they should be able to text you on a weekend and call you at night, and that you're going to leave your family's table at dinner, and there's no boundaries. And so I think people should be safe to set the boundaries that are necessary for them, still do the job they're supposed to do, have the commitment they need to have, but have boundaries in place so that work does not become all consuming.
Oh, that's great. That is a lovely definition, and that's what we hope for people. Any last bits of advice that you want to give to the listeners about relationships in particular?
My one request would be to just do a bit of self-examination, maybe just even start with your triggers. What is it about someone else, about other people that irks you, that sets you off in whatever way? We get set off differently. It's not always explosive, it could be shut down. So looking at triggers And then the other piece is considering this idea of filters. We really don't see that we have a frame that we put on things to tell us what's right, what's wrong, and just question it. I mean, I'm not a fan of, you don't beat up on yourself. You don't use this as an opportunity to be like, oh my gosh, how horrible, I've been doing this to people. Just see it. Just observe it. Just watch it. Don't judge yourself. Don't judge it, but just see how it plays out. I think it's a really good place to start because everything else in a way can build from there.
That's great. And if people want to learn more about what you do, about what you teach, to read more of your books or listen to your videos, how can they find you?
Probably come to our website, which is the-collaborative.com. So the word the-collaborative.com. So there's links for most everything that we do there would probably be the best way. And anybody is welcome from there to send me a note. Happy to provide whatever information. I do write a column twice a month for psychologytoday.com. And so that's something too you could check out. I write a lot about these topics and always looking too for ideas from people of something that they'd like to hear more about.
That's great. So this whole video will be on the Flourish DX YouTube channel, and then they're going to take short clips. I don't know how they're going to pick them, but it's whatever you say that's most brilliant or profound that they'll put on LinkedIn to promote this. And I'd also like to invite people to connect through LinkedIn to myself to continue this conversation. And I really want to thank you again, Beverly, for having this conversation and inspiring us on so many levels to think about the stories we tell ourselves and how we can have better relationships.
It's my pleasure. We could have gone on for several more hours. So thank you so much. I appreciate it. And I hope that we maybe inspired some folks to take some steps.